Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I am your host, Marcus Engel, and this is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. And I have a guest today that is going to touch on all of those different aspects of what we do here on the CNC podcast. Today, my guest is Joe Mull. Joe, thank you so much for being with me today.
Marcus, my friend, it is a privilege to be invited. Thanks for having me.
Well, I feel like I have to start out by sharing with the listeners a story that recently happened and how it was such a perfect example of compassionate communication that you provided for me.
Okay.
And so, dear listeners, Joe and I did this interview a week or so ago. However, in the course of as soon as the interview was over, we figured out that on our end here in my studio, we had not hit the proper button. And so the interview was lost. And Joe, you made such a beautiful comment to me when I realized I just wasted an hour of your time. And you said to me, Marcus, if this had to happen, it's best that it happened with me. And I thought that gave me such a feeling of, okay, Joe's not going to hold this against me for the rest of my life. It's not going to affect our friendship, anything like that. And I just want to thank you for your grace and your willingness to do this again with me.
Well, of course. And the entire reason that I said that to you, Marcus, is because the exact same thing had happened to me not a week ago, right before that interview. I had been recording an episode of my podcast with my co-host, and we had this wonderful 40-minute conversation. And at the end, when I went to hit stop recording, I hit start recording and we went, oh no. So I have been there. It's one of those things that happens. And it was just a rehearsal. It was a get ready, a run through, if you will, for what we're going to do today.
Well, and you made such a great comment to me too about, well, do you use checklists for your podcast? We all know that, especially you and I both coming out of the world of healthcare, we know that checklists have been one of the best and yet simplest advancements that healthcare has had in the last several decades, right? It's going down the list of things that need to happen to put a plan in place, a successful plan in place. And that's what we get to talk to you about today, is this idea of making a plan to keep people in their jobs, to keep employees satisfied and engaged and in the workforce. And that is your whole thing, is commitment to the job, commitment to the work, right? You have been on so many different media outlets sharing this news with NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox. Who else am I missing? I know that there's others.
You got a couple of them. Yeah, we've been around a little bit talking about what are the conditions at work that turn an employer into a destination workplace. What are the conditions and experiences that employees need to have again and again over time that make them join an organization, stay long-term, and give it all they've got? So really, that's been the center of my work for these many years.
And that started out in healthcare, but this is not exclusive to healthcare. So if you're not a clinical person, this kind of stuff that we're talking about is applicable across the entire workforce spectrum, right?
That's right. So I was previously the head of learning and development for physician services at UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where I managed training for one of the largest outpatient groups in the country. And then I went out on my own about 10 years ago to teach leaders how to be better bosses and to really focus on leadership development and management training. And in recent years, we've opened up our borders to non-healthcare organizations. So I do work across industries, but I'd say roughly 75% of what we do is still healthcare. That's still my first love.
And same with me, right? I love to work with any organization, but healthcare is really where my heart is at. And we know, I guess, just anecdotally, anybody who has been to a restaurant in the last year or two, anybody who has flown, anybody who has been in a hotel, anybody who has been in a retail establishment, it seems like staffing has become just such an issue over the last few years with the Great Resignation.
Mhm.
Where are we today, kind of on a macro level scale? Where are we today with employment? And I guess as important as where we are right now, what are we looking at for the future?
Right. Well, what's happening right now is a pretty significant recalibration around how work fits into our lives. And it's being driven by several factors. One, of course, is a kind of values reshuffling that took place during and after the pandemic. Well, when people looked at their lives and said, I need my job to occupy a space in my life that's different. And maybe that's a different commute or better pay or a better boss or more fulfilling work. But people are looking for upgrades to their quality of life. And while this crystallized for some around the pandemic, this has actually been a priority for the labor market going back about 13 years now. We have seen more people voluntarily leave their jobs in pursuit of better jobs consistently here in the US for more than a decade. And what we know is there's a ton of opportunity in the labor market right now, Marcus. We just simply do not have enough people to fill all the jobs that are available right now. And so, what I've been trying to help business owners and executives understand is that really there is no staffing shortage. There's a great job shortage. When you're an organization and you figure out how to create a more humane employee experience, one that allows people to enjoy a better quality of life and puts in place some of the conditions that people are looking for, it gets a lot easier to find and keep devoted employees. Let me put it another way. People generally do a great job when they believe they have a great job. If you offer a great job, it gets a lot easier to find and keep people.
Wow. So how do we do that, right? What are the elements that create that destination place of employment?
Yeah.
What does the evidence show?
Well, we analyzed more than 200 research studies and articles on why people quit a job or take a new job or stay long term with an organization, and married that together with all of the hiring and employment data that we've been able to comb through in recent decades. And we ended up writing a book called Employalty. And we can say with conviction that you can more easily find and keep devoted employees if you win in three specific areas of the employee experience. We call them ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. So, ideal job is about my compensation, my workload, and flexibility. When we get those things right, that job snaps into my life and fits like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Meaningful work is purpose, strengths, and belonging. When I get to do work that aligns with my strengths, where I believe I make a difference with people that I feel accepted and celebrated by, that work is meaningful and that activates my psychological commitment. And then great boss is the person responsible for overseeing my day to day work. And when that person shows up in a way where they provide trust, coaching, and advocacy, those are the three dimensions of great boss, I end up looking around and wanting to work with this person and wanting to deploy my effort. So we have figured out clearly that every employee in every job and every company on planet Earth has a kind of internal psychological scorecard that's made up of ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. You check most or all of those boxes, you become a destination workplace.
So how do you do that though? I mean, ideal job. Uh, you say that the era of the time when we're hiring the best person for the job, that's kind of gone now, right?
Right.
So
That's
if
right.
so first of all, flesh that out a little bit for me, because that sounds kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
Whenever we're not hiring the best person for the job, especially when we're looking at organizations like in healthcare,
Yeah.
that frightens me a little bit as a consumer.
Right.
So where do we go then? How do we put people in the ideal job?
Well, so there's just a mindset shift that needs to take place. And so we argue that the era of trying to hire the best person for the job is over, and that what you must do now is create the best job for the person. Now, I know it's hard to think back to what our world was like before COVID, but even in 2019, burnout was at an all-time high in the workplace. We know that Americans were working more hours a week than every other developed nation on earth, and at the same time taking fewer vacation days than every other industrialized nation on the planet. So we were burned out and exhausted before COVID landed. And then the pandemic happened and took an already exhausted workforce and broke it. And that is not truer in any other industry, especially healthcare, right? And so we know that we're kind of in the middle of a reckoning with how work is fitting into our lives. And so the way that we become that destination workplace is to dial in on these consistent experiences of ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. So you asked, how do we do that, Marcus? Well, we have to assess, right? Where do we exist on the continuum around compensation? Wages have been stagnant for the median US worker for decades. Are we reaching for more generous compensation? Are we providing people manageable workloads? Over the years, there has been a shifting of the work of 3 people to 2 people to 1 person, and people are overloaded. So we have to do some assessment around the amount of work that people are being asked to do. Flexibility, for example, is the #1 most requested job benefit in the world. And so where are we giving people some autonomy and some choice around when, where, and how they work? These are the psychological components of creating a work environment that people want to be a part of. And so we have to actually get in the weeds of those experiences around belonging. How do I make sure that our employees aren't just being included, but they're not experiencing exclusion? What's the DEI training we need to commit to? What's the camaraderie we need to build? So those are the kind of dimensions of the experiences that employees need to have in order to look around and say, I want to be here and I'm going to give it all I've got.
Wow. So I want to harken back to a word that you used earlier, which was humane and
Mm-hmm.
humanity, right? Because to a certain extent, we're looking at the way that work has been done in America is inhumane to a certain
Mm-hmm.
extent, right? Now, it's not children in coal mines like it was 100 years ago, but it certainly has not necessarily left us with those elements that you say need to be in place for a great employee experience. We also know that across our work in healthcare, we know that the nursing shortage has been going on for
Mm-hmm.
decades, right? And so, this is where things are become a little more frightening, because if employees are not in their jobs and happy and satisfied and engaged with their work, guess what? That leads to less mindfulness, more
Right.
medical errors, more mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we address some of these problems when we simply do not have enough staff right now to have things run even safely sometimes,
Right.
right?
So we have to look in the mirror and we have to ask ourselves, what would make this place the very best place to be a blank? That's a triage nurse, a surgeon, an administrative professional, a front desk person, a team lead, a medical assistant. What would make this place to the very best place to be a blank? And when you do that, you turn the mirror inward. And instead of blaming people and saying, boy, nobody wants to work anymore and people are lazy and there's a staffing shortage, it's how do we get people who do actually want to work for us? How do we get them to want to work for us? And really that starts, Marcus, with examining where and how have we dehumanized our workforce over the years? Where have we treated them as a commodity instead of as fully formed human beings with a life outside of work? So we see in a lot of organizations, and this is not just healthcare, this is across the board, that we've come to accept and even perpetuate systems and policies and procedures that are dehumanizing at work. For example, in some places, people don't know their schedule for next week until the end of this week. That's inhumane. How am I supposed to live a life outside of work, be a parent, be a partner, be a caregiver to my elderly parents if I don't know when I'm working? promising someone a certain number of hours when you're an hourly employee and then not giving them to them. That's inhumane. Financially, it creates all sorts of stress for me, and it ignores my financial obligations, especially when I'm expecting A and not and getting B in terms of that lower amount. Workplaces that require people to stand for the entirety of their shifts or to have to ask permission to use the bathroom. These are inhumane circumstances that don't treat people as people. And so we have to look at how do we sort of make that shift from these experiences that rob people of their agency, that rob people of their humanity. One of the other parts of the conversation that we're having is that destination workplace formula that I gave you a few minutes ago of ideal job and meaningful work and great boss. That really is the definition of a more humane employee experience. But the truth is, change only occurs when you come to believe that the absence of those things is itself inhumane. That the absence of a manageable workload or fair and generous compensation or flexibility at work is inhumane. That the lack of belonging and purpose and doing work that aligns with my strengths is wrong. When we come to believe that working for a boss who doesn't grant trust, who doesn't engage in coaching, who doesn't engage in advocacy is a violation of our basic human condition, then we start to see change occur. But for years, Marcus, I've heard leaders say, I wish I knew what these employees today wanted. Well, we've got that answer now. Commitment and retention appear when employees are in their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss. You get those things right, and people start looking around and saying, I want to be a part of this.
I want to be at this place. I love that you're touching on belonging there. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and your podcast has been your podcast, Boss Better Now, has been ranked right up there with hers and the Harvard Business Review podcast. So you've got some great accolades there to be put in that type of esteemed category. So great work on that. And listeners, go check out Joe's podcast, Boss Better Now. Even if you're not a boss, there's enough leadership skills and just education in there to help you live a better, more humane life for yourself too, and those around you. I think this is not just applicable to the workplace. This is a human experience ultimately that we're trying to bolster in the workplace so that we actually have enough staff to make the world run, right? We have enough staff to make the world run. The meaningful work aspect too it's a thought that I feel like so often in healthcare, people go into it with that true heart intention. But just like anybody else, we can get burnt out on the job, even if you are the most compassionate, generous, caring, bedside nurse, bedside professional, it still becomes a Tuesday, right? You're still doing tasks every day. And even in the work that we are committed to and we love, we can still feel those effects of burnout. I'm so interested to hear that stat that you shared earlier about how we work ourselves senseless in America. Right? We're not taking enough vacations. We're not taking it, which also means we're probably not taking enough sick days.
Right.
How do we turn the shift on that culturally to make it trickle down into the work environment?
I think we have to recognize that the employee experience, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we've gotten away with it in healthcare for a long time, Marcus, relying on the meaning that people derive from doing that kind of work, being a caregiver, making a difference in the lives of others, saving, healing, and protecting the people in our communities. And we have relied on that to carry us through. But we know if we've worked in healthcare for any longer than 10 minutes, like you said, sometimes it's a really bad Tuesday. And so our gas tank's empty. And when we have folks who again and again end up being asked to rely on sort of all the romantic elements of working in healthcare, but they don't get all of the other conditions that they need to be emotionally and psychologically committed, we see an exodus. And guess what? In healthcare, we're seeing an exodus. We're seeing nurses and providers and administrators who have said, I believe in this work, but I just can't do it anymore. And it's because they're being robbed of those other conditions that we've been talking about, of a manageable workload, of belonging, of a boss who coaches and advocates, right? When I do workshops and training and keynotes around this employalty model, and I ask folks in the room, especially in healthcare, of the following experiences on this internal scorecard, what are you getting the most? And without hesitation, they always indicate that it's purpose, right? In that meaningful work category. It's, I definitely make a difference in the lives of others. I know my work matters. I can see, I have line of sight between the tasks and duties of my job and the way in which it makes a difference for other people. The problem becomes that I'm not getting these other things, right? I'm not getting a workload that's manageable. I don't have flexibility around when and where and how I work. My compensation isn't cutting it anymore. And so we have to recognize that all of these things together have to be satisfied or created for employees if they're going to be emotionally and psychologically committed to their work.
And that, I'm going back to the idea of belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever we feel psychologically safe in our workplace, when there's not lateral violence or
Mm-hmm.
bullying or exclusion, as you said, um, that does help create the humane working conditions, right? Nobody can be on a job for 40 hours a week or whatever the set amount of time is and feel good at the end of the day if you don't feel good on your shift, if you're feeling um, any type of psychological insecurity, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's just so important. So I'm glad we're bringing that element into this conversation about what the future of work is going to look like. And that actually brings up one of the questions that I always ask to my guests, this idea of psychological safety. And
Yeah.
you've heard me speak before. You know what I do and my stories about presence and those types of elements in healthcare. And so I'd like to pose you with a question that I ask all guests, and it's also the same question that my pre-meds at Notre Dame reflect on at the beginning of every semester and write a nice little 2-page paper about. But that is to share an experience that is a time that you were there for someone else or that someone was there for you. When I give that prompt, does that bring any stories to mind of presence?
I benefit from this every day, Marcus. I live in a world that's filled with a lot of travel, that's filled with a very full calendar. And I'm so blessed to have a couple of people in my orbit who are constantly there for me and who they work every day to create the conditions for me to thrive, right? I've got a woman who works on my team. Her name is Jamie. She's full time and it's like having two people. She's that good at what she does. And she makes it her priority to put all the pieces in place that allow me to be successful. I can say the exact same thing about my wife, who, I travel for work, but she's the hero of the story because she's holding it down at home with 3 kids under the age of 13 while also working. Right. And so we have a lot of conversations about, how do we manage this in such a way where neither one of us is feeling overrun or missing out on the pieces and parts of our lives that are important to us. And so at the same time, as I have those people who are showing up for me in a way that's really present and allowing me to be at my best, I have an obligation to constantly ask myself, how do I do the same for them? Right? How do
Mhm.
I create the conditions at work for Jamie to thrive? Right? How do I grant her the trust that she deserves? And how do I advocate for her? How do I support her on her career trajectory? The same is true for my wife, right? When I hit hit the door after a trip, I'm trying to do laundry and do the dishes and grab the kids and wrangle everybody and walk the dog. And because she's been doing all that by herself for days. And so for me, it's, I got this, you go take care of you. And that's the kind of reciprocal relationship that I think we're talking about here around employee experience, that the word employalty, which we created to capture this complex system of experiences that employees need to have, really is about that two-way agreement, that I am going to be loyal to you as an employee if you're loyal to me as an employer, and you create this more humane employee experience that allows me to live my life to its fullest. And so in all those ways, I think that you're talking about with humanity and presence, Marcus, that's what springs to mind for me.
I am so fortunate, and I am sure you consider yourself so fortunate too, to have great assistance around
Mm,
you to help with the business.
right.
You and I met because of National Speakers Association. We've been on the platform together at
Hmm.
various patient experience conferences, et cetera. And we know that road life is hard,
Hmm.
but the only thing that's harder than road life is home life when one of the family members is
With
out
half the
of the
help, right?
house. Right. Exactly. And I feel so fortunate that that my wife Marveline is also a big part of the business running things, and that I've got a few other folks on my team like you're Jamie that
Mm,
really make things around here happen. And I am always trying to think of a way that I can boss better now,
right.
to make the experience of the work that we do, because we're all mission driven, right? We're all
Yep.
mission driven, but just like in caregiving, we can all have a typical Tuesday where we're disengaged from what we're doing. I'm so looking forward to digging into your new book, Employalty, about this, so I can improve myself. And I'm going to encourage everybody to get a copy of Joe's book. And also, please, I'm sure you would appreciate, like all authors do, those Amazon ratings and reviews and
Yes.
such like that. So I wish you great luck with the book.
Well, thank you, my friend. We know that for years we've been encouraging bosses, hey, if you want to know what employees want or need, you should ask them. And you should, but we also know that employees don't always know what they want, or they don't
Mhm.
necessarily have the ability to articulate in a way that's clear what they need. At the same time, we also know that some employees aren't comfortable speaking up. There may be power dynamics at play that prevent people from speaking truth around what they need or want or aren't getting. And so we set out to create this blueprint that if we get a set of conditions, a set of experiences right at work, we dramatically increase the chances that we're giving people what they need to be at their best. And then, of course, when people want to be a part of it and their commitment goes up, every metric you care about in your organization goes up, right? Quality, safety, patient experience scores, revenue, reputation. And so this idea of creating a more humane employee experience, Marcus, it sounds soft, but it's a business strategy, right? It's not
Mhm.
altruistic. It's, if we want to have a thriving hospital, if we want to have our clinics and our practices creating the kinds of experiences that patients come back to and tell others about, then we need to take care of employees first. If we take care of the people, then people take care of everybody else.
If you take care of people, then the people take care of everybody else. What a profound, simple, and important message. That's fantastic. Joe, in the time we've got left here, can I shoot some kind of random get to know you questions by
Let's
you?
go. Yes,
All right.
sir.
So, what is the best live performance you have ever experienced?
Oh man, the best live performance I have ever experienced. I've got all kinds of things racing through my head. Hold on. Okay, so I'm thinking about some
Sure,
of the
sure.
concerts I've seen. I'm a big musical theater fan.
Mhm.
Um, I've seen some productions of things like Jesus Christ Superstar and Les Mis that were just astoundingly good. I guess that's where I'm going to go first. Probably when I've seen shows like Wicked on Broadway
Mhm.
or Les Mis. Les Mis is my all-time favorite show, so uh, that's what I'm going to go with.
Okay, excellent. And honestly, I would say the same thing. I would
Yeah.
say, specifically, Les Mis. As
Really?
much as, yeah, as far as just the pure uh, theatrics, etc. I've been to rock concerts that are, the best shows I've been to, but there is little that can compete with the overall scale of a Broadway
Yes.
musical. And seeing Les Mis when I was 16 years old at the Fox Theater in St. Louis was an experience for me that was rather formative at that point in my
Yes.
life. Yeah,
We have that in common. That's the first show I ever saw. It was right about my sophomore year in high school. So right about
yeah.
that 16 years old. And that changed the trajectory of my life. I ended up going and getting a degree in music and theater. And as a speaker, I still use all of those performing arts, all that training and all of that skill as I do this work across the country. And I can trace it all back to that experience. So yeah, right here too. Very formative.
Where did you go to undergrad?
I went to a school in Western Pennsylvania called Indiana University of Pennsylvania,
Pennsylvania. Hmm.
IUP, which is one of the state public institutions here. Big, thriving school for a lot of years, beautiful campus, but it's not a branch campus of IU. It's its own
Hmm.
thing.
Excellent, excellent. Uh, before working in healthcare, I did almost all of my work in the education world. So I have
Right,
heard of practically every college or university in the country. May have not been to all of them, but I've at
right.
least heard of them just through the work. So, second question then. Let's say you're 16 years old
Mm.
and you're hanging out with your friends on a Friday afternoon after school, after play practice, after whatever, and you're cruising around. What is on the radio
Ooh,
that you and your teenage cohort are
yeah.
listening to?
Well, it's probably so. If anybody listens to satellite radio like Sirius XM, there's a channel on Sirius XM called Lithium. It's
Hmm.
all like alternative rock from the early '90s. That's pretty much the soundtrack of my high school experience. So I'm probably hearing things like Pearl Jam and Nirvana and the Gin Blossoms. I'm hearing, Soundgarden and all those bands from that era. That's definitely what was banging on the radio.
Yeah, same, same too. A lot with a lot of classic rock mixed in, a lot of Led
Yes.
Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix, Grateful Dead kind of stuff mixed in there too. But yeah, I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a time where uh, I know music has always been an industry that kind of gets like the publishing industry that there's a lot of corporate stuff in there, but at least it was in the days before computers made the
Right.
music more than guitars and drum sets. So,
Right.
all right. And so, my last question for you, and you've probably shared something very similar to this in over the course of this episode, but if you had the world's largest billboard on the world's highest mountain,
Hmm.
what is the message that you want to share with humanity?
Boy, and thinking about how to compartmentalize this, and we even did the older recording, right, when we sat down the first time to do this, and you hit me with that question. I should have known that this pitch was coming right over home plate. I guess in the simplest way, it's that employalty makes work work for all. This idea of creating a more humane employee experience, of creating the conditions at work that we know lead people to thrive. It doesn't just crack the code for commitment, it enhances quality of life. Think about what happens when we transform work from something people dread going to or they have to endure to something that they find fulfilling, to an experience that complements all the other pieces and parts of their life that are going on. When we get that right, we create societal change. Think of the transformation that would occur in relationships, in mental health, in physical health, to our finances, right? If people are in their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss, you would enhance quality of life here on earth for everyone. So this idea of, employalty makes work for all. We're improving the work experience, not just for employees, but for employers, for business partners, for patients and families, for communities.
And with the world community being what it is these days, there's no better time for this kind of work. No better
Completely agree,
time
my friend.
that we've got to focus on being more humane, because we cannot continue to go at the clip that we're going in some negative directions without, as you said earlier, a reckoning. So I want to thank you so much today for giving the listeners such a deep insight into what is going to help create that workplace that works for everybody. I think you
Right.
said workplace that works for everybody. Joe, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm thrilled to be with you. Love the conversation.
And we will certainly link to Employalty and your work, your podcasts, everything. But I just want to really encourage too any of the organizations that I have worked with over the years. If you are looking for a speaker for a leadership event, if you're looking for a thought leader, you cannot find a greater mind than Joe Mull. So, Joe,
Wow.
thank you again for sharing your insight, and I look forward to being with you the next time.
Well, it shouldn't surprise me at all because that's who you are, but that's incredibly generous, Marcus. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
As always, as always. And listeners, thank you for being with Joe Mull and I today on Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. This is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Thank you to everyone who continues to share and subscribe and rate and review the podcast. We really appreciate all the help bouncing it out on social media. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time on Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare.